I used to be a plain, ordinary film critic, but somehow weird stuff started happening around me. I found a childhood toy who rules an underground kingdom from out of my basement. I got a weird AI friend living in my TV. I fought a giant straight out of a kid's storybook and met a magical winter elf. But right now, I'm being forced to complete a checklist of TV and movie genres so I can save all of existence with the power of snarky film commentary. And you're saying he finally bought that hat, and he wears it even when he isn't making a video about baseball?
Well, not all the time. Just when it rains or on super bright days.
I finally tracked these time distortions to their source. Ralph, Xylo, how long have you two been here? A couple of hours. We got in a few minutes after you finished the last video. That wasn't a couple of hours ago. That was a couple of weeks.
What?
Yeah, I went to import the footage into my computer and then time went funky all over. It's no longer consistent from place to place.
It's okay. According to Einstein, that's totally normal.
In non-local space, yeah.
Uncle Jess, we had temporal anomalies before and everything was fine.
We've had anomalies before, but never like this.
So what caused the change?
I don't know, maybe interacting with your daughter from the future?
Why didn't you tell us about that anyway?
I was trying not to violate the Novikov principle of temporal consistency. We're not really sure if Susie is from the future or just a future. For once, I was trying to be responsible and prevent, well, this.
Given our little time predicament, I'm taking it that means Matt's not going to show up?
Yeah, we'd better call him, or he might end up showing up here last week.
Fish.
I think something's wrong with his comlink.
0.5 0.5
I think he's backwards?
What? He hung up? But we didn't even...
Never mind. We better start the review.
If you say so. Our story begins with this marble coming out of warp near Earth. It fires, phases, and fries Florida. Man, even these Zindy guys don't like Ron DeSantis.
Even more than I hate that god-awful Enterprise theme song?
But before we get to that, the probe veers off course and crashes. When we get back, we're on Kronos. The Klingon High Council is pissed. They say they had captured Archer twice, but he got away. They should have killed him when they had the chance. Then somebody comes up with the bright idea of sending Duras, the guy who failed to keep him prisoner the other 2 times, to go get him back.
I feel like I'm missing something.
The problem with doing a representative sample is you can't review every big episode. Long story short, Archer has fought Klingons a few times. It didn't go well for them. Klingons hate Archer, Archer hates Klingons.
I gotcha.
Back on Enterprise, the entire senior staff is called in for a briefing. These are very busy people, so they're kind of pissed that Archer called them down there, but he's still on the line with Admiral Forrest. Right when Reed and Travis are about to get up and leave, the doors open. Archer says, "I've got good news and bad news. The good news is we're going back to Earth. The bad news is it was attacked. A 4,000-mile swath of land from Florida to Venezuela is gone. And about 1 million people are dead.
There is no straight line between Florida and Venezuela?
This episode doesn't have time to explain that. There's too much to do. Later, Trip goes in to see Archer. He asks, did Forrest mention what part of Florida got hit? Are my family okay? Archer says, I don't know. Trip says, then what can you tell me? Archer says, well, remember when I said 1 million people died? I lied. Casualty reports were at 3 million. T'Pol comes in and says, Vulcan researchers have found the probe. Before that can sink in, Reed calls from the bridge. They have bigger problems. They have Suliban cell ships incoming. The Suliban do some sort of technobabble thing. Beam Archer away. What? Where am I?
On my base.
I kinda don't have time for this. I'm trying to save the universe from this time war that is kinda sorta my fault.
It's more like 50% your fault, and 50% mine.
Care to explain that?
Not really.
Then why should I believe you? You're the guy who made me watch Bible Man. And wait, didn't you kill me that one time? Maybe?
I did? Oh, yes. You're right. I did. Then Ralph rewound time, and you killed me. So let's call it even.
Why?
My benefactor treats me like hash. And all I wanted was a good source of omega-3s, good combats, maybe a soul to swallow, and a challenging conquest.
Is that all? After you send me back, recalibrate your transporter to factory settings. Then flood your matter stream compression chamber with inverted charmed quarks and quasi-neutrinos. Then set the controls for these coordinates. Then make sure to readjust your subspace field array to account for temporal drift.
Why? The coordinates are for McDonald's.
It's in a morally inverted alternate universe. It's unlike any McDonald's you've ever been to. Well, unless you've been on the Pennsylvania Turnpike on Thanksgiving weekend.
Thanks, I owe you. So, before you go back, you better call one of those few remaining good Donatellos about something.
What?
I'll tell you, but only off the record.
Now, where was I? Oh yeah, Captain Archer on the Suliban ship. Which means it's time to party with our old pal Silic. He says, hey John, how's it going, man? Archer says, you did this. Silic says, nope. Look, I know a guy. He wants to talk to you and explain everything. Archer asks, why? Silic says, I don't know, something about saving your species from extinction. They go to the new communications room. Future guy is on the line. He says it was this species called the Zindi. Another faction in the temporal Cold War told them that humanity is going to destroy them in 400 years. So they decided to destroy you first. Archer asked, why should I believe you? It's a pretty fair question. The initial bad relationship between Earth and the Klingons, that time Daniels' future was almost erased, and the Klingons going from a pretty minor empire to a formidable threat to the entire quadrant, was all masterminded by Future Guy. Future Guy says, fine, I won't tell you about the Xindi's newer, bigger weapon and how to stop it. Archer asks, why did you even care? Future Guy says, something contaminating the timeline. You don't like that kind of shit. Who cares about the why? The real question is, do you have any other choice but to believe me? Archer gets back to the ship. T'Pol says if Future Guy knew the Xindi were going to do this months ago, why not tell us before Florida was destroyed? Archer says, it's Florida. He didn't think we'd care. T'Pol says, really? Archer says, no, he didn't think we'd believe him. T'Pol replies, I don't. Archer says, you've seen evidence of time travel 5, maybe 6 times now. Denying that is highly illogical. They get back to Earth. There's an update. Casualties are now at 7 million people dead. They don't have time to grieve because Klingons come out of nowhere and attack.
Yeah, they were oddly diplomatic ones.
What do you mean?
They say if they hand over Archer, nobody dies. Honestly, though, with Klingons, if you hand someone over, that person's probably gonna die.
Archer politely tells them to go fuck themselves. They engage in a brief battle, but there's one thing the Klingons hadn't counted on. While not as powerful as Warp 5 vessels, there are other Starfleet ships around Earth. The Klingons put up a valiant fight, but
They retreat? What the f*** is they call up with that?
yeah, that is rather weird. The crew get to see the devastation to Earth for themselves, but they don't get to dwell on it. Archer has a meeting with the CNC. Admiral Forrest hangs on Archer's every word. Saval says, you're full of shit. Archer says, think of it this way. If I'm right and we do nothing, Earth is dead. If I'm wrong and you send me out there anyway, I'm out of your hair for a minimum of 6 months. From your point of view, that's a reverse Kobayashi Maru. Saval says, Captain, the coordinates the Suliban gave you are in the Delphic Expanse. I might not like you, but even I wouldn't send you to the one territory that Vulcans and Dorians, Tellarites, and Klingons have explored where they never returned. Archer says, that sounds like the Bermuda Triangle to me. Been there, done that. Saval says, I did mention that even Klingons are afraid of the Expanse, right? Archer says, I don't care. My crew and I are willing to go. Forrest says, okay, but I need proof. Archer says, Future Guy thought you'd say that. He told me to quantum date the debris. So let's go look at it. Most of it checks out, but a thermos in the wreckage is negative 400 years old. Forrest says it must be a malfunction in the scanner. Archer says a malfunction affecting both scanners. Saval says you do know lack of a logical explanation we can understand doesn't make your gibberish correct. Archer says I have one more thing to show you. He walks up to the base of the probe and opens up a hidden panel. He says, ta-da! Before revealing a frozen corpse. Archer goes back to the ship. Fox says that the Vulcan High Command has found some strange radiation around the probe, so they sent a physician to observe his physical. He starts asking Archer a bunch of questions about the Suliban and the Temple Cold War. At first, they think he's the Vulcan equivalent of a conspiracy theorist. Then Phlox realizes he's been an idiot. He didn't vet the guy. He's not an expert in radiation. He's a psychiatrist. So he and Archer boot the guy from sickbay. Back on Earth, Trip fulfills the promise he made to Reed earlier in the season to visit his hometown. Too bad about the giant crater. All the things he used to talk about. The ice cream parlor, the bowling alley, even the movie theater that he used to go to with his sister every weekend are gone. It's that moment that he realizes she's dead. In Space Dock, Archer and Forrest are going to take a quick look at the USS Columbia NX-02, the Enterprise's sister ship. Originally, the idea was that she would be virtually identical to Enterprise, apart from the fact that she'd be a little bit faster and better armed. That's no longer the case. In the 3 weeks between scenes, Enterprise has undergone an overhaul. Archer has gotten what he wanted. They're going to the Expanse, with one caveat. He's got to have a complement of Makos on board.
He's getting a bunch of sharks?
No, military assault command officers. Think the Navy SEALs of outer space. Archer says, sir, that wasn't Starfleet's idea. It was mine. Reed is good at what he does, but I need ground troops I can send down on missions who are 100% expendable. Forrest says, that sounds like you plan to be out there a long time. Do you even know where in the Expanse to look? Or what type of weapon to look for? How long you'll be gone? Anything? Archer says, nope, I don't even know who Future Guy is. But I don't think he would have told us anything if we didn't have at least a chance of stopping it. In sickbay, T'Pol asks Phlox, hey, a couple of episodes ago you were super anti-war. Are you sure you want to stick around for this mission? Phlox says, I've given that a lot of thought. People die in war. But how many more people on this ship will die if I leave? Think of me as Hawkeye Pierce in outer space without all the crazy hijinks. What about you? Are you staying? T'Pol says, no. The Vulcan Science Directorate has determined that time travel is impossible. They think Captain Archer is insane and have ordered me back to Vulcan. And I never violate orders. Phlox says, sure you don't. T'Pol says, I'm being serious. I leave in the morning. Phlox says, uh-huh. As T'Pol turns away, Phlox says, you know what's funny? You and I are the only two aliens on the ship. I want to leave, but I'm staying out of a sense of loyalty to my friends. Up until we got to Earth, you would have done anything to leave. Now you're trying to come up with a logical reason to justify staying. Reed and Trip are in the armory. Reed says, my ex, the Vissian, remember her? She had her people send us some fancy new torpedoes. So once you finish the diagnostics, we should hold a funeral for Elizabeth. Trip says, who? Reed replies, your sister? Trip says, oh, her. What's the point? There's not a single molecule left to bury. Reed says, well, you have to let yourself grieve somehow, because whatever you're doing now is not doing your mental health any favors. Trip says, you want to do something for my mental health? Make sure these torpedoes pack as much punch as they can. When we find these, Xindi, I want to detonate 380 trillion terajoules of grief up there. Forrest, Saval, T'Pol, and Archer go back to the CNC. They watch the logs of a Vulcan ship that returned from the Expanse, Queen Mary style. It looks like it was directed by George Romero. Archer says, was that supposed to scare me? Saval says, yep. Saval takes T'Pol aside. They walk to the courtyard outside. He tells her Vulcan High Command insists you return to Vulcan. You've been around humans for so long, they're going to require you to do a 6-month reacclimation before you can return to duty. T'Pol says, but I want to go with Captain Archer. Saval says, you are Vulcan. The fact that you admit to wanting anything is proof you need therapy. Now shut up. Archer walks with Forrest. He says, don't worry, Enterprise will be ready to go by 0600. Vulcan is on the way to the Expanse. We'll make sure T'Pol gets home. That way Saval won't have to get her an Uber. And, no, the Enterprise is leaving space dock. No one told me this was going to be a special 3-hour episode.
Please, the space dock team would give you plenty of time for a nap. Well, it would if you didn't cut to Klingons waiting in the wings.
Archer and Trip take a last drink. Once they enter hostile territory, wartime regulations kick in and stuff like this will become a thing of the past. Trip asks Archer, how's Porthos taking all this? Archer says, you mean crewman Porthos? He's fine. I gave him a posting as the ship's morale officer. They get down to business discussing the opening for a new science officer. They agree that T'Pol could be annoying as f***, but she knew how to do her job. Whoever got the position would have some really big shoes to fill, especially now. Archer laments the responsibilities that he has been given. He says, our mission used to be all peaceful exploration in between water polo tournaments and movie nights. Now we're charged with preventing an extinction. Trip says, hopefully ours. Fuck those indie guys. Archer says, I'm not saying that's the mission, but if it comes to that, I'm down. And then the Klingons attack, which is all the excuse Reed needs to try out his new toys. Thanks to that, the Klingons go down like your uncle after Thanksgiving dinner. Archer yawns and says, I guess we're going to Vulcan.
Beep boop. Oh, that's my transmission incoming noise.
Turn yourself over to the temporal authorities, and nobody has to get hurt.
Nick, how long did Donatello say those weapons upgrades would take?
Perhaps about 3 months, and at best we get one shot.
Due to the time differential, how long has it been on his end?
Yeah, it's been about 3 months.
We don't have time for this. Fire! Later, Archer is in his quarters. T'Pol turns the tables on him and breaks into his room in the middle of the night for a change. She says, what's this about me going back to Vulcan? Archer asks, isn't that what you wanted? She says, this ship barely holds together without me on a good day. And these are far from good days. Archer says, I know that, but it's not really my decision. She says, fine, I'll resign my commission with High Command. I'll enlist in Starfleet. You can start me as an ensign. Anything. As long as I'm on that bridge. Archer says, well, I was gonna make crewman Porthos pull double duty as morale officer and science officer, but you talked me into it. Reed calls Travis and says, we're not going to Vulcan after all. And because this episode does not slow down, we skip over another 7 weeks. Once they get out there, they're not all that impressed with the Delphic expanse. Unless you want to see what it would look like if you blew up Grimace, it's not much to look at. T'Pol points out that there's still half a day's travel from the expanse itself. It's that fucking huge. They really push those engines and get there in 6 hours. And then nothing happens. Apart from the launching of a new communications buoy. But that's not exciting enough, so the episode treats us to another battle with the Klingons.
But you can tell they need business this time because they have 3 ships.
Not really. The moment the Enterprise approaches the Expanse, 2 of the ships flee faster than Gizmo when he sees a squirrel. So Duras says, Archer, come aboard and we won't blow you up. Archer says, nah, maybe later. Reed launches 2 torpedoes. But since the Klingons have transferred 70% of their defensive power to forward shields, it does jack and Archer says, it's crazy Ivan time. They use the nebula to swoop in behind the Klingon ship. They fire. All Duras can say for himself is, "Sos." With the Klingons gone, the Enterprise has a strange and dangerous part of the galaxy to explore. A ticking clock and a planet to save. And that's it. That's the episode.
So what do you think?
I don't know. Something about this episode feels, off.
Is it the fact that everybody, apart from Dr. Fox, seems a tad out of character?
Future Guy and Silic being helpful. Trip, usually the nicest guy in the world, even if he is a bit of a doofus, going all Death Wish. Reed is usually the one to fire torpedoes first and ask questions if and only if Starfleet asks for an after-action report. He becomes touchy-feely. Archer approves of straight-up revenge. T'Pol stays on board. Saval tries to warn them about the Expanse, not as a courtesy, but because he seems to actually give a shit. And Klingons retreating. Klingons! Yeah, everything about this seems wrong. But no, that's not it.
Is it that an optimistic franchise like Star Trek, dipping its toes into early 2000s post 9/11 paranoia?
No, Star Trek has a history of addressing real-world topics that goes all the way back to 1966. So this episode seems to fall on the wrong side of history, in favor of many Bush-era policies. The overall arc? Well, that would be a spoiler. Plus, I try not to let the fact that I know what happens later affect my judgment on what I'm watching right now.
So it's the pacing?
Yeah, that's it. This episode starts with a literal bang and does not slow down. It begins with the attack on Earth, to the crew finding out, to Archer getting abducted by Silic and Future Guy, to his argument with T'Pol, to them returning to Earth, to the conference with Saval and Forrest. Add in the friction between Trip and Reed, and then getting the ship and crew ready to go back out there. Apart from that scene where Trip returns to his hometown, and that moment between T'Pol and Phlox, there aren't any purely character moments in this episode. which would be fine if Star Trek was an action-adventure show. But it's not. Okay, as TV science fiction, it will always have a little bit of that in its DNA. What separates Star Trek from something like 24 is that it isn't really about the action. It's about people with a problem and the ethicality of the actions they have to take to solve it. Sometimes the characters will make the wrong choice, but when they do, the story is about the consequences of that. It's almost like the show knew it was renewed for season 3, but found out that Rick Berman and Brannon Braga would be taking a back seat to a new showrunner who wanted some of the big subplots, like Duross's feud with Archer and the temporal Cold War, pushed aside so he could focus on his own thing. But they only found out a few weeks beforehand, so they only had one episode to do it. And we know nothing like that would ever happen. Anyway, this episode needed to slow down. Star Trek is at its best with quiet moments. Something like
Archer visiting his ex for a little booty call, huh?
yeah, that would have been nice.
Or what about a subplot where Hoshi is apprehensive about remaining on the crew as they head for war?
Okay, that would have been a parallel to the T'Pol story. Then again, T'Pol is in every publicity shot for the show. T'Pol got an action figure in both waves for Enterprise. Doing that story with a character whose continued involvement is not a foregone conclusion might have been better.
Both of those scenes exist. They're in the bonus features.
You've got to be kidding me. We got 3 fight scenes with the most inept Klingons in history when we could have gotten actual character development.
What do you expect? It's on the same network that brought you WWE SmackDown.
Okay, that covers The Expanse. What about the rest of the season? I'm not sure I can do it.
Yes, you can.
You're right. I can. It's just hard. Enterprise Season 2 had some really good episodes. Apart from the Cogenitor, there was Minefield, Dead Stop, and Stigma. Not to mention Carbon Creek. It's an episode most of the regulars do not appear in. It's so good that you almost don't notice. The episode was nominated for a Hugo Award for Best Screenplay. It ultimately lost out to Buffy the Vampire Slayer's Conversations with Dead People, in part because the votes for Enterprise were split between Carbon Creek and A Night in Sickbay. It had a lot of episodes that, while highly entertaining, were not top-notch. We talked about Shockwave Part 2 in detail. But Horizons is an episode that tries to remind you that Travis Mayweather exists. The Breach is a nice, quiet Phlox episode that doesn't treat him like comic relief. That happens maybe once a year. Regeneration, while it has some major continuity issues, is a really good standalone story. Depending on who you ask, A Night in Sickbay falls into this category. Other reviewers have already covered both sides of this argument, and that's the only reason I didn't cover it. As for the rest of the season, well, when it wasn't remaking famous or popular movies, it was remaking episodes of other Star Trek series. This is bound to happen with any long-running franchise, but in Season 2 alone it happened 5 times. We already discussed Vanishing Point and Cogenitor. But Precious Cargo was a mix of TOS's Elon of Troyes and TNG's The Perfect Mate. Judgment is almost a beat-for-beat remake of the middle act of Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, right down to the captain's lawyer being played by a guy who was a Klingon in another Star Trek project.
You're forgetting Dawn. Shaka when the walls fell. It's just a poor man's Darmok.
So my verdict is... There are a lot of really good individual episodes, but I can't in good conscience recommend somebody watch the entire second season. I think Star Trek Voyager is overall my least favorite series in the franchise, but I think Star Trek Enterprise Season 2 belongs in that block of Star Trek that we're all better off pretending doesn't exist. You know, like TOS Season 3, or the first 2 years of Star Trek The Next Generation. But at least it didn't try to sell me wheat checks.
Alright, hold on. I did a little digging here. By digging, I mean I'm a computer and I can immediately recall everything in the past. You gave good reviews to the collection of commercials back in Season 0, the 1994 live-action Flintstones in Season 1, and Flintstones Little Big League earlier this year.
Your point?
You claim to be annoyed by the Flintstones, but according to your own reviews, you enjoy it 37.5% of the time. That's only 12.5% lower than your hit-or-miss ratio with Star Trek, which you claim is the best thing ever.
That doesn't matter. What matters is best to worst. Space Command, then Enterprise, then Space Patrol. There. We have all the badges. The time anomaly should start sealing up.
No, you must still do the final reckoning.
What's that?
A tier list video.
Whatever. See you folks next time.
I wonder what Gizmo is dreaming about.
Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe.
And remember, to really help this channel grow, visit patreon.com/ParodyErrorFilms and become a patron today.